How many years? Oh my God.
24. Renee's 26.
Many years.
Yeah.
So before we get started tonight, I want to throw out a question which we'll deal with as we take a look at our theme in the Torah portion tonight. What does it mean to grow up?
Oh.
You know, if you're a kid, what does it mean to grow up?
Get your driver's license.
Get your driver's license. Yeah, Ashley's telling her children, listen, this is for you.
I'm asking my 13-year-old right now, what does it mean to grow up?
Yeah, what does she say?
To have more responsibilities.
Oh,
I like that. Yeah, Dell.
Responsibility and to take it and the ability to handle it and the ability to show others and start leading in a more mature fashion, make decisions.
Yeah, mature decisions, better responsibility. Dell, you were going to say something?
One word, freedom.
Yeah, if you're a teenager, that might be the word you would like to pick anyway.
My son liked that answer. You got a chuckle out of him for that one.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it isn't so simple. You know? Now, Barbara, you didn't give a kid answer. You gave a grown-up answer. Right? Right? Anybody else have a grown-up answer? I see Jerry just in the corner of the screen there, you know.
Okay, he's waving his hand.
Yeah, I mean, he's sneaking in. Okay.
You want an answer?
If you've got one, I'm game.
What does it mean to be grown up?
Growing up is where you have to solve your own problems.
Okay.
You see, right now, you know, we're like, like certain birds that help them in the nest at some point.
Right. I could argue that, you know, at every stage of life, there are problems where you may want to turn to somebody else who's had more experience dealing with those problems. And that's not a sign of not being grown up. It's in a way, it's a sign of maturity to be able to accept the help from someone. But I get your point.
Grown up.
Yeah. Anyone else?
That's tough. Growing up.
Growing up. Anybody else have something you want to add?
I'm still going with driver's license.
Yeah, that's kind of a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old answer, isn't it?
Well, you get my mentality now.
Well, some of us are just young at heart, right, Ronnie?
I love that.
Okay.
The more you hand back the diapers.
Hand back the what?
Diapers.
Yeah, right. Yeah. When you have to take care of somebody else, that's really being grown up.
Right.
Yeah. So let me put the texts for tonight on the screen. And here's the verse that I chose to begin with. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son, and she named him Moses, etc. And sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. Now, obviously, what do you notice in this verse?
He grew up and then he grew up again.
That's it. So what do we mean? So clearly, just in this verse, there are two different meanings to when he grew up. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look and see what the Midrash has to say about it. Okay. So here's the first piece from Midrash Tanchuma. So why does it say this twice? Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eli said, the first time means in physical stature. In other words, that, he's now not an infant. Maybe he's a toddler, or maybe he's older than that, but that's physical. The second time means in greatness. Now, what was his greatness? That's that he went out to his kinsfolk, as the verse continues. That's one answer. That's what it means for him to become great, that he actually went back to his people.
Rabbi?
After being raised in the household of Pharaoh. Yes, Ronnie.
At what point did he realize he was a Jew? Because he said went back to his...
So that's a fine question. And most people assume that at some point in childhood, Pharaoh's daughter told him where he came from.
Okay.
Right? And I think that's a reasonable assumption. Most of us, if we adopt a child, and I've never done this, but I've talked to a lot of people who have. If you adopt a child, you don't keep it a secret from them.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a family that did that. Okay? It was a family in one of my congregations who had never told their daughter that she was adopted. And at a certain point, she was about ready to get married. And the father died. And the mother realized, it's on me. I've got to tell her. And I was part of that. It was a very difficult meeting. So most people do it the smart way the first time. And they tell children when they're very young. And they know, yes, I'm your mother, but you had a different birth mother. Right? So hopefully Pharaoh's daughter did something like that. She didn't wait until he was old enough to go out to his kinsfolk. Yes.
I thought the story was from the Orthodox point of view that as soon as they pulled Moses out of the reed basket, Miriam ran over and ended up being the nursemaid right away.
No, the mother was the nurse.
That's in the text of the Torah.
Right.
No, the mother was
So you can read, this is earlier in chapter 2, you can read what the Torah says about that. It's very straightforward. Basically Miriam said, I'll get a wet nurse for him from among the Hebrews.
And that was the mother.
Right, and so got the mother.
So he got his mother. Clever, that little girl. Yeah.
But who brought up the child, Moses?
So who brought up the child was Pharaoh's daughter. So what is it what did it mean for him to be Pharaoh's daughter? So greatness, says this midrash, comes in, can mean different things. Oh, he had great character because he maintained a relationship with his people, and he went out to them and he helped them, etc. Right? Sometimes greatness isn't moral greatness. It's just status, right? So the midrash continues. It says, alternatively, Pharaoh said to Moses, whether I want it or not, which is a nice way of saying, I didn't really ask for this, but you are my daughter's son. So whatever part of my greatness you want, in other words, whatever job you want in the firm that runs Egypt. Speak and I will give it to you. And Moses said to him, I want to be appointed head of your works. So maybe, you know, minister of infrastructure, such as it was. So that's status. It's not greatness, but it's status. It's greatness in the sense of status, right? Okay. So that's the first piece. Okay. Sam, I got your message. So sorry about that, but I'm glad you're here with us. Okay. Other comments or questions before we go forward? And Sam, if you do have questions, just put them in the text. Eventually, put them in the chat, and eventually I'll see it. I'm kind of slow with that, but I'll get there. Or Ashley will get there.
Okay, what is the time between when Moses realized that he was a Hebrew and when he killed the Egyptian slave driver?
So if my presumption is correct, that he knew from a very young age that he came from the Hebrews and he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. So it's quite a long time. Now he's grown, you know, so that's maybe when he's 5, 6, 7, 8, right? This is when he's a big guy already. He's a grown-up. He's probably in his late teens or 20s.
And he never confronted Pharaoh
about
the fact that his people, the Hebrews, were slaves.
No, he doesn't. Or at least there is no record of that.
Okay.
Right? It is just part of the contradiction with which he is brought up.
Correct.
That's
Because,
a great question.
You know, if you are Pharaoh's family, he's still Pharaoh. He may be your dad or your grandfather or whatever, but he's the big cheese.
Right.
You're very careful about how you ask him questions, particularly questions that question his decisions.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're very
because
difficult.
after all, if he can do that to them, he can do it to you.
Yeah, very difficult situation to be in.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
And I mean, I would imagine it's very, you know, being part of a royal family isn't all it's cut out to be.
Yeah, look at England.
Look at Princess Margaret.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can all put on the crown after we're finished in class. You know?
Thank you.
So we may pick that up. I watched a season of it and then I dropped it, but when my wife finishes catching up, we might go on. So yeah, it's, you know, and that's a much more benign monarchy, right? I mean, how much power does Queen Elizabeth really have? Yeah, not so much, but it's still, you know, enough authority to be way more than a normal family.
Yeah.
So, okay, other comments or questions here? All right, let's go back to the text.
Are we sure that he didn't know who his real kin were until?
But well, it's likely that he did know who his kin were. Even if you're talking about his family of origin, not just having been among the Hebrews, it's very likely that he did know.
Well, if he knew that this was his real mother, how did anybody keep it from the royal family?
So, I mean, I'm not sure what the question is, Han. You are part of Pharaoh's family. You don't have many choices. You have so many advantages, but choice is not one of them. And if you're, growing up in the palace, you know that your family are a bunch of slaves. It's a very grown-up thing to do, to say, I don't identify with you anymore, Pharaoh. I identify with my people, my family. And that didn't happen. That doesn't even happen after he leaves Pharaoh's household. Because where does he go?
He goes to Midian.
There you are. We're going to come back to that part a little later on. Okay, so couple of midrashim here. It says, when Moses grew up, Moses did not grow in the normal way. And the original midrash just does not explain exactly what that means. But here's the presumption of the Yalkut Hadrush. It says the normal way of growing up, when a person becomes famous, he forgets or pretends to forget his brothers, his relatives, and his friends, and ignores their problems. That's Moses with his family of origin. However, we are told that even though Moses had grown, meaning he had attained a high rank in the country, being a member of Pharaoh's household, he nevertheless did not grow in the normal way, meaning that, dropping his past. Even after he had attained that rank, he did not forget his brothers and friends, and he went out to his kinsfolk and then took an interest in their fate, etc. Right? This is one of the things that makes Moses remarkable. That you might describe it differently from what the Midrash says, that he did not grow in the normal way. But he's clearly a thoughtful person who at least is willing to see himself outside of the advantages of being in Pharaoh's household.
Well, one of the ways he tried to help his kinsfolk.
I'm sorry, Barbara?
Yeah, one of the ways that he probably tried to help his family, if you go back to the Midrash Tanhuma, they have it that he wanted to be head of the works, which would put him in charge or overseeing how the slaves were being treated. And therefore he could control or alleviate the distress of the people.
Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's, we don't know for sure, but very possibly that is what the Midrash intends here in saying that's what he was trying to do. He was angling for a position where he could affect the treatment of his people. Okay?
And he certainly wouldn't have said anything to Pharaoh or saying, hello, Mr. Pharaoh, I'm a Jew or I'm a Hebrew, because his mother probably told him, but warned him to keep his mouth shut so that he could take his advantages and use them then to help his people.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that part. I think Pharaoh had to know where this child came from. The fact that he allows his daughter to keep this child is interesting, right? But
unbelievable
that he didn't know that the child was a Hebrew. That strikes me as unlikely. Pharaoh knows what is going on in the household. If his daughter didn't tell him, someone would have. Yes, Anne.
That's what I was trying to ask before. Miriam didn't say, let me go get the child's mother. She kept that a secret. Maybe the secret remained. Maybe nobody knew who his real mother was.
Well,
including himself.
I'm not convinced of that. I think Pharaoh's daughter knew that this was a child of the Hebrews.
She knew it was a child of the Hebrews. She said so, but he didn't know who his precise mother was. He didn't know that it was his own mother that was nursing him.
That's not, I don't think that's such a significant point. The fact is, everybody knew that he was a Hebrew.
Right.
That's what gives this appointment some importance, right? It's not that he's going to go back to his family of origin and that he's going to make things better just for them. It is that the Pharaoh knows that he's a Hebrew, and that's probably all he knows. Doesn't know that he knows his family of origin, but he knows that he's a Hebrew, and maybe, as Barbara suggests, this is why he chooses this particular task.
But was it when he was taken from the reed basket, he was wrapped in a blanket that was obviously Hebrew in origin?
Whether it was or not, that could be a signal that says it's a Hebrew child, but just the fact that somebody abandons their male child at a time when male children are being killed, that's what tells Pharaoh's daughter and everyone else that it's a Hebrew boy.
Okay.
And she says so. She says, this must be one of the Hebrew children.
Yes.
Rabbi, was he circumcised?
Probably.
So that would be a very big indication that he was a Hebrew.
But Egyptians were circumcised in those days.
Yeah, it's not so clear that would have told them anything.
Okay, I did not realize that. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions or comments here? All right. Next comment. All right. Arbar Brunel says very directly, when Moses matured and came to know his family, he was enraged to see their state of affairs. And he therefore left the palace, put himself in their shoes, and witnessed their labors. Right? He wanted to know exactly what was going on once he understood that his original family were slaves. And so that's what leads him in the direction of what he does ultimately. And we know, of course, that Moses risks his life. Sure not going to be very popular back in the palace to find that he's killed one of the Egyptian taskmasters. That was probably not part of the deal that Pharaoh worked out with him, if indeed the Midrash Tanchuma is correct. Okay? So he goes out, he connects to his family again, and he learns as a grown-up what exactly is going on and how terrible it is for them. Okay? And so, says the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, when it says he went out to his kinsfolk, it's not because he had been so connected to them so strongly for all of those years. It is because he risked his life for Israel that they were called his people. In other words, it's less about his, kishki kind of connection to relatives, to family. It's just the fact that, he's put himself on their side. And so now he's one of them, which is why ultimately he has to run off. That's how it goes. Punishment for doing the right thing, right? Yes, Ann.
I think it was Freud who said Moses probably really was an Egyptian. And that's why the Bible goes to such trouble to claim that he really was an Israelite.
Well, maybe. That is not our story. Right? Our story is Moses, who is born as a Hebrew. However, Freud has a point. And I'm sure you understand this. You brought it up. Why would the Torah conceal the idea that Moses was an Egyptian? And?
Because they want to claim him as our own.
Because we want to claim him as one of ours, right? And so the story is a way to make him both. It's not how we read Moses, but maybe Freud was right, okay? But if Freud was right, even so, the Mechilta takes on even greater significance. Because, if you risk your life to save someone else, you're connected to them forever. So the point that Freud was trying to make may have been moot. Okay? Correct or not?
I don't get that.
Right?
Okay, one from the river, he was actually in Egypt. He was.
Okay. Other comments or questions here? All right. So let's take a look at this next piece. This is from one of the Hasidic masters, Tiferet Shlomo. He says, the Torah explains Moses' greatness here as he went out to his kinsfolk. That is, not just that he was a Hebrew, but every individual was in his eyes as a literal brother, and he was ready for self-sacrifice on their behalf. Freud's father was a scholar of Midrash. And to this day, one of the editions of the Midrash Tanchuma is called Tanchuma Buber. Right? Right? And there's a relationship there between this grandfather and the Buber who edited the Midrash. So here's, maybe even Freud would like this one, right? That, if you are open to every human being, then you have a relationship to them. And so we say in the Shabbat morning prayer, Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelkos. In the Shachrit service, for those of you who know it, Moses rejoiced at the gift of his portion. that this was his joy, that he gave his soul for Israel, the soul being the divine portion from above. Because Hasidic thought is like Kabbalistic thought, and the soul is connected to one of the higher realms, depending on how high your soul goes. Okay. So that, I thought it was an interesting piece on the on Moses and his kinfolk. Right? Other comments or questions up to here?
I have an idea.
Please.
I'm reading it as we're talking about it. There's commentary that Pharaoh's daughter was a bit of a rebel. Is there conversations about maybe she instilled some of this kind of loyalty to the Hebrews in Moses to let him know, hey, this is where you come from? Like it was both sides, where he maybe got it from biological mom in those formative years, but they were saying even the idea that the Pharaoh's daughter went and bathed in the Nile, there were a couple concepts of like the fact that she even did that versus one of the bathhouses, or, you know, just that particular area.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, like, some of the things.
I'm not aware of any commentaries to that effect, Ashley, but I will tell you, it sounds very reasonable to me. In fact, if you were not a little bit of a rebel, if you were not at least a little bit independent from Pharaoh, why would you go to the Nile and pull a baby out and adopt it?
Right. And why would Pharaoh let you do it if you weren't that rebellious child and just said, just do it? Just, you know.
Like he hasn't already had enough grief from her.
Right.
So maybe this will settle her down.
Right. Like, okay, she's going to do it anyway. Let her keep it. It'll be her like little pet project. And
maybe she'll grow up a little bit already.
Right.
And there we have that term again, grow up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Yep. But it was a different kind of growing up. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Ashley. That's great.
Did Pharaoh's daughter ever marry?
We do not have a record of that. Certainly not in the Torah.
Okay.
Maybe yes, maybe no. So a little bit of a rebel in other ways too. Mm-hmm. Could be. Could be. Okay, other thoughts or issues? All right, hearing none, let's go to the next piece. And here I skip over to Midian, right, where Moses has fled and now lived for 40 years. He's an old man. I wonder how old his father-in-law is. Good grief, right? But here he is. He's been in Midian 40 years. And all this time, he's tending sheep. And by the way, one of the texts we're going to see has to do with, suggesting that being a shepherd was a well-respected profession. And I'm really not clear on that, because, if you stand around in sheep dung all day, how elevated a profession is that in society? Okay. Yes, Anne.
Oh, it was these shepherds coming from somewhere else who conquered much of the Middle East, including Sumeria and Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were called the shepherd kings. And shepherd became a metaphor for kingship for centuries after.
And look what happens, Moses and King David.
That's because they were both destined for leadership. So they were referred to as shepherds, whether they actually were or not.
Good. And that's possible. Okay. So, Oh, just one more thought before going back to the whole business of Moses growing up and all that he did, you know, that this, as he reached a certain level of maturity, I came across a definition of maturity that is when you can sense your concern for others outweighing your concern for yourself.
Mm.
You know, and of course, you know that there are philosophies, I'd call them pseudo philosophies, that reject that kind of altruism and say, well, selfishness is the natural state and it's the way it should be, right? But that's not Jewish tradition, of course. Jewish tradition says, you know, having empathy and the ability to sacrifice a little bit for oneself is, you know, indicates a higher degree of maturity, a higher degree of morality, right? And of course, we could use that standard to evaluate public figures. Right? You know, to what degree are public figures able to identify with those who are more in need than they are? So, just a thought. All right. Now, back to Midian. Okay. So, what does it mean? So, here it says, he's tending the flock. He drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. All right. So, what does this mean? He drove the flock into the wilderness. Wilderness is another word for desert, right? Why do you drive a flock of sheep into the desert? So that's the starting question. Ann and then Del.
He did that so that he would make sure not to impose on anybody else's property.
Okay, you're cheating. You're looking ahead. Either
I
that or
didn't
you already
look.
knew this.
I didn't look. I read it years ago.
You read it a long time ago because you're very well read. And yeah, that's the next text, however. We're gonna come to that. Del?
You can't, well, the sheep will not wander off into the wilderness because there's no food out there.
Yeah.
You're going to have to drive them.
Right. And that is what you see in Yosef Bechor Shor. It means beyond the wilderness, right? That you take them through there, through the desert part of the area, and you push them out to where there is something for them to chew on. Right? Okay, that's one answer, right? And the second answer, which Ann gave first, right? Here's the whole piece from the Midrash, but it is based on a Mishnah in Bava Kama, right? So it gives a little verse from Proverbs. Every word of God is tried.
Every word of
Meaning
God.
that before God does anything, he gives you a test. Okay? Before God confers greatness on man, he first tests him by a little thing and then promotes him to greatness. You have two great leaders whom God first proved by a little thing. They were found trustworthy and then promoted to greatness. He tested David with sheep, which he led through the wilderness in order to keep them from robbing private fields by grazing there, thus teaching us that he fulfilled the Mishnah, one must not rear sheep and goats in the land of Israel, for which they give two reasons. One is overgrazing the land, and the other is sheep and goats eating other people's crops. So, apparently that was a problem, right? Next, and similarly, in the case of Moses, it says he drove the flock far into the wilderness to keep them from robbing. And so God took him to tend Israel. As it says, verse from Psalm 77, you led your people like a flock in the care of Moses and Aaron. In other words, God leads them, but Moses and Aaron are the leaders. Yeah, Ann?
Has everybody heard repeatedly in the sermons about Moses noticing the little lamb is going the wrong way and he follows it? And
we're coming to that. We're coming to that. Okay. So if you know it or not, doesn't matter because you're going to know it in a few minutes. Okay. All right. Other comments here? All right, weiter. Comment of Sforno. Sforno says there's a different reason why he took the sheep out this way. He brought them to the mountain of God. In other words, he came without any other people with him to seclude himself in a place where he could pray to God. Right? That's why he drove them into the wilderness. He drove them out to an area where there wouldn't be anybody else to disturb him.
Sforno wasn't exactly orthodox. Where did he come up with this?
Well, he looked at the verse. He says there's a reason why it says Chorev, the mountain of God. And he says the reason why it says it's the mountain of God is to point out this is why Moses went there. He went to be with God. That's Forno's interpretation. Mountain of God, of course, could also be a foreshadowing of what we're going to see a little later in the chapter, right?
Burning bush.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Next text. All right. From Shemot Rabbah. All right. Our rabbi said that when Moses was tending the flock of Jethro in the wilderness, a little kid escaped from him, a little goat. He ran after it until it reached a shady place. And when it reached the shady place, a pool of water appeared and the kid stopped to drink. And when Moses caught up to the kid, he said, yeah, I didn't know you ran away because you were thirsty. So you must be very tired now. So he placed the kid on his shoulder and walked away. Carried that kid all the way back. And thereupon God said, because you have mercy in leading the flock of a mortal, you will assuredly tend my flock Israel.
Thank God, the woman was a lunatic. Knew nothing about education.
I beg your pardon?
Connie, what'd you say?
No. I just read that Betsy submitted her resignation.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Yeah, I know. Women knew nothing about education. Okay, go on.
Well, it's like,
we'll deal with the part.
Everything happens for a reason, but sometimes it happens late.
Yeah.
So anyway, here's the story that Anne was referring to about Moses being such a loving, caring shepherd. And that is why, God knows that he's the right one to, be his messenger to get his people out of Egypt. Now, this is just one theory about why God picked Moses. What are some other theories? Why would you think that God picked Moses?
Because he hit the Egyptian to protect the other slave.
Because what?
Because he tried to protect the slave from the overseer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And by the way, the tradition expands on that and says there were 3 different times when Moses intervened in something that he wasn't directly involved in. That was the first one, where he saved a Jew who was suffering at the hand of a non-Jew.
When he helped the daughters?
I'm sorry?
When he helped the daughters of Zelophehad?
No. That
one doesn't count.
That's
okay.
much later.
Okay, Rabbi?
Yeah. Oh, hold on. Let me finish this little piece.
Okay.
There's the first time he intervenes is on behalf of the Jew who's being beaten by a non-Jew. The second time, there's two Jews fighting with each other, and he gets between them. And that's when they say, oh, you know, you're already in trouble. That's when he knows that, you know, they're going to find out back in the palace about what he did. But he intervened when two Jews were fighting. And then the third time is when he gets to Midian and he intervenes on behalf of Jethro's daughters, non-Jews, who are being mistreated by the other shepherds who are also non-Jews.
Why did you say that one was much later when I tried to give it?
No, you mentioned Zelophehad.
I was trying to say Jethro.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the third one, the daughters of Jethro. So he intervenes regardless of who's fighting with who.
Yeah.
And that is what, you know, one tradition suggests is the reason, you know, God knows this guy has a future in helping him bring about justice and freedom. Yes, Ronnie.
Okay, but also there's the fact that he was probably the only person in Egypt that had one foot in the palace and the other foot with the Hebrews. He knew both sides. Therefore, he could make decisions based upon his knowledge of living in the and Hebrew.
That is the other reason that is commonly suggested why God picked Moses. You know, you can't expect slaves to get themselves out of slavery, right? And not likely, you know, and then go back and lead people to freedom. You need someone who knows what it's like to be free.
Right.
Who's known that from the beginning, who values that later. And so, you know, that's the other reason the tradition suggests that I know of that God picks Moses. Of course, you know, there's a long time to wait, right? You know, this is 40 years later. All of those things happen 40 years before or more. But it says, you know, this is the time and the person has already been picked in advance. Okay. And the next text actually relates to this a little bit, Ronnie, not directly, but it tells you that, you know, Moses grew up in the household of Pharaoh and therefore was raised for leadership. And here we see the teaching of Philo. I don't get to quote Philo very often, you know, but, you know, it's not commonly available in Hebrew or English for that matter. But I found this a translation of this. So he says, just being the shepherd, tending the flock is a lesson in leadership. Leadership and shepherding both involve certain management skills. People, in a certain sense, are the most civilized of herds, right? You know, sometimes in synagogue, we say we're trying to get people to go somewhere or do something. It's like trying to herd cats, right? But they are a herd, right? The experience of hunting offers good skills for people of warlike disposition because generals have to first familiarize themselves in the chase the pursuit of wild animals affords hunters the opportunity to coordinate their attack. The same principle applies to shepherding. The care and management of tame animals is a training ground for people aspiring to leadership positions. And this also explains why kings have always been shepherds, been called shepherds as a title of respect and honor. The shepherd's occupation has been a respectful form of employment since the days of antiquity. That's the part that I question, and I told you I was going to question that, but that's Philo. Okay. So, any thoughts about this one?
Even Philo should get it right once in a while.
That's right. Okay. Next.
But don't you think shepherding, it could be a broad term for anyone who is leading a group of people in the right direction?
Yes, but how did it get to be that? Because there were at the beginning real shepherds that conquered people, partly by running ship.
Politics is also the art of shepherding people, sometimes where they don't want to go.
Right.
But getting them to back you.
Follow. Shepherds probably ran their flocks over the crop on purpose so that the people would be beholden to them or at their mercy.
But don't you think teachers are also shepherds?
Mm-hmm.
Once the word is being used for leadership, you can use it however you want.
I think another synonym for shepherd could be teachers.
Sure, it could. Anybody in authority could.
If they're good teachers.
Yes.
Don't allow too much chaos. Don't let the sheep get out of the ranch.
Fanny, you should make a comment at this point. I taught two of her Fanny.
Okay.
Which two?
So next, I bring you this piece from Maimonides, who says, even though a leader establishes the land through justice, and the law must pierce the mountain, meaning it's got to be real, strict justice, even so, leaders of Israel must mix within the qualities of the soul the two traits as one, righteousness and justice, mercy and judgment, loving kindness and truth. Now, those of you who have studied some Kabbalah with me, you know how central this is. I mean, Maimonides was not by any means a Kabbalist, but he definitely was an advocate of the middle way, you know, like a good Aristotelian. And Kabbalah also suggests that being able to balance those traits is critically important, you know, because how does evil come into the world? You know, God doesn't create evil, right? But there are many ingredients in the world, just like, you know, if you're baking a cake, you need the right ingredients, but you also need them in the right proportions. You know, you can't just throw 3 cups of baking powder in there. That's not going to work very well. I mean, unless you're talking about a really big cake. So the same thing with love or mercy and judgment, or, you know, power, rules, boundaries, right? Because if you know, and I say this in all my classes, but some of you have never been in my Kabbalah classes. If, you know, what happens if you raise a child with too much love and not enough rules?
Wrong behavior.
You're gonna get one spoiled kid, and you're gonna get somebody who thinks they can do anything. Or, you know, as I sometimes put it, you get the 1960s all over again. Some of you remember the 60s, okay? And what happens if you raise a child with too many rules and not enough love?
He's repressed.
Yeah, either that or you raise a little fascist, right? So, you know, you got to have everything in balance. And that's where Kabbalah and Maimonides agree. He says, furthermore, the essence of true and righteous justice will not come except out of feelings of the quality of loving kindness and the depth of mercy. To be able to stand at the right hand of the oppressed against their oppressors, to save the downtrodden from those who crush them, etc., etc. Right? That's Maimonides saying, you know, yes, there has to be justice, but if you don't have caring love and mercy, you don't have a society. Right? Yes, Anne.
I don't remember which of Aristotle's disciples said that the Jews were a nation of philosophers. I don't know if you remember it either, but
I don't know that either.
There is a place in Deuteronomy 13 when it's talking about people who advocate worshiping other gods. And it says, you don't have mercy on him. Mm-hmm. There's the place where you have to be strict.
Right, right. So we're just about out of time, and I really have to wrap this up. But it seems to me that there are two kinds of questions here. One question is, you know, if there's no superfluous word in the Torah, if there's nothing that is unnecessary in the Torah, why does it tell us he led the flocks into the wilderness? And the second question is, what does it tell us about his character? So you have a text that presents him as, you know, ethically scrupulous. He's, you know, and he's not the only leader that God trained by being a shepherd and so forth. Philo talks about these very practical aspects of being a shepherd. And Sforno emphasizes his spiritual nature, right? He went to the mountain of God. He was looking for God, right? And then this piece of Maimonides stresses his compassion and his drive for justice. And so I think each of us has to decide for ourselves which of these things is most on point when we look for a leader. Whether it's a political leader or a religious leader or just, you know, the leader in a group that you belong to. How do you choose the leader? Here are some of the options. Okay. So with that, I'll let you go. Thank you all very much. Shabbat Shalom. And it's good to have everybody here and good to get back after a couple of weeks of break. And we'll see you with Va'era next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Ashley, thank you very much for keeping us in herd.
We'll see y'all next week.
All right.
Thank you, Ashley, for your good comments.
Yes.
Yep.